So many tangents this week. So many tangents. A lot of stuff's been happening in the past week of gaming. Enough stuff that it's really starting to make me wonder if there's sort of an equivalent of Sweeps Week that coincides with E3 or something. But there's one thing that a lot of these expansions and DLCs and all these other things have in common. Power creep. Before we begin, I will cite one source immediately. If you watch Extra Credits, you'll know they did a show about power creep already from a design perspective. What I'm going to be talking about will overlap with their show, but my intent is not to plagiarize them. So you really should go watch their show on power creep too. I'm just saying. So, what is power creep? It's what happens when game designers make every patch, expansion, or add-on more, well, powerful. In the short term, you may not notice it, but over time, you really do notice it. MMOs are especially prone to this, but any game that is ongoing eventually has this problem. You know, I can think of a way to show you guys this rather than just tell, but not really equipped for it here. Hey, Kitty, do me a favor, keep an eye on the place while I'm gone, okay?
Yeah, sure, I got this. Like I wasn't doing anything else right now. Wonder if he's got any good games.
Alright, so I want you to imagine that this table is like a progression chart for any given game. Let's call it Tablelandia, sure, why not? So this is how it progresses. When you first start the game, you start off with some fairly powerless enemies because you need a newbie land area. So this is your D2. Best I could do. Then as you progress out of there, you start going through tougher enemies, but you also get better gear for it, so you get to your D4 land. Then as you keep on progressing, you get D6, and then D8 land. All pretty common progression, right? Now let's say we're going to start releasing some DLC a little bit down the road, but on our DLC you can get D10 gear, except all the enemies are also now D10 too. That's DLC 1, and DLC 2 we're going to start releasing D12 gear. Ladies and gentlemen, power creep. The thought is that each DLC, patch, and expansion has to introduce more powerful gear than what existed previously. It's actually pretty lazy game design. Rather than making engaging content or interesting areas to explore, it's just offering more power for spending time in the game. Good old carrot on a stick stuff. The most obvious problem is that as the player gets more powerful, the enemies have to track along with them to keep providing a false sense of challenge to the players. This is actually one of the big problems with power creep. The player seems to be getting more powerful because their damage numbers get bigger, but the reality is that individual fights don't get shorter. The individual fights just take as long on the top end as they did in Newbie Land. You're doing the same percentage of damage per hit to the new crop of bad things trying to kill you as you were to the old crop of things trying to kill you. A recent example actually happened in the DC Universe Online with the addition of Weapon Mastery in their newest DLC called Amazon Fury Part 1. Weapon Mastery was hyped as a new core mechanic and is something that would change the foundation of the game and how it was played. All players, regardless of role, would be able to produce massive amounts of damage output. To boil down the combat mechanic, you perform a series of attacks in a specific order, and you have an opportunity to use a superpower that will hit with super critical damage. You know, I pointed out the DCUO that their game was pretty much a damage stat only game, and Meps on Twitter actually said that that wasn't their intent, but, well, I present to you for evidence a 20-minute boss fight. I am not exaggerating. What happened here was that the dedicated damage player had a computer crash, leaving 3 of us without the Weapon Mastery damage boost to fight the end boss on a 4-player alert. Not a raid, a basic alert. Now, we won. It took us 20 minutes of chipping away, though. The fight was not difficult, the end boss just had that many hit points. It's fights like this that have made DCUO a DPS race, and the players know this. And don't kid yourself, there's a lot of social pressure on just doing pure DPS. I have been told several times to not play my support role, just go damage. Seeing parties of 4 DPS is not uncommon in that raid because it's the only way to put dents in trash mobs or mini-bosses. It doesn't help when the dev team puts emphasis on it themselves.
Look at that! Look at that!
What?
Tank, number 4 damage
yeah.
behind the DPS.
That's,
behind the DPS.
Good job. Good job, Earth.
Good job, Spittle.
So,
Is it really that bad? Well, let's put it to Tablelandia standards. The game pretty much went from this to this overnight. Now, it has had one fairly interesting side effect, though. It's pretty much rendered all the old content obsolete. Remember what I was saying about the bad guys tracking in power with the players? Well, the old content stays the same. It's just end content that provides the new gear, rewards, and harder enemies. So, wisdom seems to be that the more powerful gear is a reward to the high-level characters so they can go back into old content and demolish it effortlessly. I'll put this bluntly, nobody really goes back to do old content once they have more powerful gear. At least without a specific purpose. They might go back as a favor to a friend to carry them through an instance or to get a rare pet or a mount or a title, but other than that, there's no reason to do old stuff. So as a result, in games like World of Warcraft, 75% of the available content goes ignored because it's old. It won't get you any better gear, so why bother doing it?
Oh good, you're back. You really need more games in your Steam library, you know, they kinda suck.
Yeah, I know. Thanks, Preacher. Okay, so what does it even matter? I mean, who cares? Old content is old, new content is new, and new content makes us more powerful, and because we're more powerful, we're all better, and because we're better, we're happy, right? To get to my point, I kinda have to sidetrack a moment with a simple question. Does having better gear mean you have better skill at something? Now when I ask you like that, you're probably going to say no. I mean, having a nicer keyboard does not make you a better writer, that's just logical. However, industries exist on the sole concept that buying their product will make you better at something. How else can you justify selling bottled perspiration when water is just as good? No, seriously, this stuff is basically artificial sweat flavored with Kool-Aid. Not even a joke. Now, ask the same question with the knowledge that the gear really does make a difference. Now your answer might change, or at least you'll think about it a little more. And in gaming, not having powerful enough gear gets you killed regardless of your skill level. There's a reason that the looking for group chat, people ask for their gear score and not saying, I want experience in the raid. Now on top of that, let's add the superficial gratification of getting more powerful gear, because it makes you feel more skilled. Now just by wearing the right armor and using the right weapons, you create massive damage and can be protected from all the stuff that used to one-shot kill you in the past. Game companies know about this, and they even admit it to some extent, if you read through the hype. It's kinda like shooting a 50 caliber sniper rifle for the first time. Wielding that much power, it's kind of amazing. But in MMO culture, and a lot of game culture for that matter, the gear is more important than the skill required to wield it effectively. In fact, I'm going to go as far as to say that that's pretty much across the board in MMORPGs, that the gear is infinitely more important than the skill. I always kind of find it funny when hardcore gamers talk about how good they are based on their tier of gear, but then again, they really can't prove their skill otherwise, can they? Put down the keyboards, because I can hear a lot of you guys about to put up the arguments that, oh, if you're got this gear, then obviously you're skilled enough to play top end, but I would disagree. I'll go as far as to say that if it really did rely on skill to get top tier gear, most of the hardcore players would never be able to earn it. Now I say this because when the first critique is usually get better gear, or when they scream LGP, they never offer advice, that tells me they really don't know what they're doing. The irony of this is that high tier armor is basically a reward for making a time investment in the game. It doesn't require a lot of skill to obtain this stuff, just putting in the time. Now, alternatively, you can pay the game company real world money to buy temporary boosts, buffs, or replay tokens to speed up the process of gear grabs. Pay with your time, pay with your wallet, they don't care. And I can already hear the hardcore players screaming that this is the game being dumbed down for casuals, but you're not faultless here either. Hardcore players have demonstrated time and time again that they'll happily grind out time-wasting dailies rather than demanding more skill-based challenges. Damage sponge enemies do not show skill, it's just a longer grind, and somewhere I suspect you know this too. You want the same superficial ego boost you accuse the casuals of wanting too, and the game companies are giving you exactly what you want. You want more powerful gear, not a more skill-based game. It would be really easy for these companies to... Actually, no, I take that back. It really wouldn't be easy, or else they'd already be doing it. But the best way for these companies to avoid power creep in their games is to just not put power creep into the game. The whole thing is just a slippery slope. Once you start down the path, you cannot roll the game back. I'm actually convinced that game companies would rather shut down their game than admit they ever made it unplayable due to power creep. So the real trick is to just not implement it in the first place. For all of its flaws, Defiance had this concept down before DLC 5. In theory, you could play the game with your starter weapon. In practice, it's a lot more difficult, but in theory you could do it. I actually used several weapons and armor for months, happily, because they worked for me and didn't need to alter them. But DLC 5 didn't just drop power creep into the game, it was an outright avalanche. Interestingly enough, about $15 a month or so, it'll buy you boosts and power-ups and better gear grabs. Now, MOBAs in games like World of Tanks, they're also really good at balancing from person to person. Mostly. I'm still not convinced it's not rigged. But they have to balance it, because any grouping has to be fair, or mostly. Then again, games like this have advantages because it's all player versus player. There's no end to the game content as long as you have opponents to shoot at. Unlike MMORPGs, in which a player can just blaze through the content in a weekend. And actually, come to think of it, I'm not entirely convinced that power creep isn't a scheme designed to slow players down from what they lovingly call consuming content. Some power creep is necessary. You need a newbie area so it's easier content, players get up to speed on your mechanics, but let's face it, if you've got to grind on each tier of armor for weeks or pay the company money just to hurdle it, your game's going to last longer because you're stuck on a tier. You know, the other possibility is that it answers a question from the previous video. Why do we have over-the-top punishment and rewards? Because game companies don't think we have enough motivation to play their games otherwise. Without this reward of better gear or fear of social or in-game punishment, they may think that we wouldn't bother doing anything and just leave their game. If that's the case, I'm not sure if that's depressing or condescending. I would love to play a game that wasn't just an endless gear chase. I mean, okay, sure, finding gear that fit your playstyle, that's one thing, but grinding for days on stuff that the game's going to give you eventually anyway, yeah, that kind of gets old. But then again, it goes against the modern mantra of gaming, and that is everybody wins. That, and I'm not sure I could put up with the hardcore players whining when they suddenly find out that all the gear in the world won't save them, that they actually need to have skill. Last second dig! I thought about trying to leave this thing on a really funny note, but instead I want to ask you guys a question, and please feel free to leave comments down below how you feel about this one. Who would you rather have in your raid party? Would you rather have a good player with bad gear, or a bad player with good gear? Internet, go!